That's right. I'm glad to be here.
And so myself, Larry, I wanted to, or Representative Hall, I'm sorry, I wanted to ask you a couple questions about some things that been going on in the legislature and how people can do something about it. First off, voter suppression.
Well, we know that the current group of legislators who have control of the House on the Republican Party side have decided they want to keep control by denying people the right to vote and change their majority. We know in the last election more people voted in a mid-year election than have ever voted before. Um, Unfortunately, they decided to elect majority Republicans based on campaign promises. Now they've seen that those promises are not being kept. They have decided, the Republicans have decided to make it so people can't vote for a change. And certainly that's a violation of their civil rights, violation of their constitutional rights, both federal and state. So they've taken a lot of issues and a lot of measures to try to keep people from voting. One of the things they've done is cut a week off of early voting. And by cutting that week off of early voting, then everybody who would use voting early as a convenience won't have that opportunity. But also, they've cut off a week of early voter registration as part of that bill. In a later bill, they cut off all on site registration, so you could not register during the early voting period. You could only vote, so you would have to have registered more than 30 days prior to the primary. So these two measures alone will cut off a lot of people from being able to vote. What they also do is make people have to go to the precinct where they vote and stand in long lines. And we know we have a presidential year coming up, and just by that sheer inconvenience, they plan to cut down the number of people who come out to vote. So once again, they'll have an opportunity to keep their positions, although people may be dissatisfied and will be dissatisfied with the measures they've taken. They will be able to keep people from coming out to vote them out of office. So they're really putting up their defenses to ensure they don't have to respond to the people.
Now, I heard you say something earlier today on your show about now if I want to take my grandmother to the polls and she's in a different district, voting district, that could be illegal for me to do that.
Yes, what they've done, and again, they've done many things to suppress the vote, to keep you from being able to vote early, to keep you from being able to give persons a ride to the polls unless they live in the same precinct you live in. And so if your mother, your grandmother, or any relative does not live or vote at the same precinct that you vote at, if you give them a ride, anyone, whether a family member or not, to a different precinct than where you vote, you will be in violation of the law.
And we didn't go into detail about this because it sounds crazy to me.
Well, we have some crazy people in charge, and they're coming up with some crazy laws that make no sense and that are absolutely against the intent of the Constitution, against the state constitution, the federal constitution, the Voting Rights Act. They don't care. They just want to suppress the vote now that they're in charge, and they don't want you to be able to take your relative to vote. If your relative needs a ride, they don't want them to
So
be able to vote.
I'm sorry. So the repercussion is what? So the police officer pulls you over somehow through osmosis. They know you're taking somebody, and however they figure it out, and then they say you're under arrest.
Well, what would probably happen is they passed another regulation that says anyone can challenge you when you're in a polling place. And so they would have poll watchers outside the poll and probably trying to challenge you. And again, this is a way to create a hostile environment
Right.
at the voting
Very
place
much
to
so.
keep people from coming to vote. They don't want to deal with all this hassle. And so it's not really the actual criminal prosecution that
Mm-hmm.
they're going to use to suppress the vote. But they're going to have their people out there challenging people, saying, you gave someone a ride to the polls, where do you live? And that challenge and hassle and that intimidation is what they're going to use to also suppress the vote. So it doesn't matter whether they ultimately prosecute you. The question is, can they discourage you and intimidate you so you won't come vote or your parents won't
Well,
ask you to give them a ride?
that's interesting. The scenario you just used because, like, I mean, I'm nice, but if I go to the poll and somebody say you just drug your grandma, where you from? I'll be like, none of your business.
Well, that's right, and that should be the response. It is none of their business. They aren't qualified. They don't have any special appointment that allows them to challenge you as someone giving them a ride. They can challenge the actual person voting, and that's bad enough because even under this law we're talking about that gives them the right to challenge, anyone can challenge someone else's right to vote, even at your proper precinct. Someone can walk in. They don't have to be screened by the precinct officials. They can just come up to you and say, precinct judges, precinct officials, this person shouldn't be voting. You need to check them out. And at that point, they're required to check you to make sure you're authorized to vote at that precinct. But the person that's making the allegation has no responsibility at all. They don't have to be checked. They don't have to determine that they actually have a right to be an observer and to challenge you.
And they don't have to be an officer or any
They don't have
type of...
Under current law, campaigns and parties can have precinct observers, and those observers have the right to make that type of challenge. Under this new law, they're saying anybody can come in off the street. They don't even have to be a registered voter themselves. They don't have to be from that precinct themselves. They can bust them in from Alabama or Mississippi, or they can bust them in from a Klan rally or a Klan sleepover the night before, and have them come in and go to all the black precincts and challenge people time after time after time, saying you're not supposed to be there. That slows down the voting process once again. We're cutting out early voting. So then that slows down the voting process. People get discouraged who are standing in line waiting for the precinct officials to verify your right to vote. Other people get discouraged that don't want to get in a hassle about being challenged. And the net effect overall is to push the voter turnout down even on election day. They're getting rid of early voting, period. And then on election day, now they've turned their sights to that, and they're saying we're going to suppress and intimidate on voting day in every way that we can.
Now, what do you think? I know I've noticed, I've been at a lot of the different rallies. I've seen you there as well. And I'm just, to me, maybe people aren't aware. And I don't know, but I'm not seeing enough people.
Well, and this is a great thing that you're doing now. We're trying to reach the people to make sure they understand these are their rights, but they only get to keep them if they fight for them.
Right.
And this is not about discussion, and this is really not about dialogue. This is about fighting. And we're at the point now where you have to be willing to fight with what means you have. That is turning out to vote. That is making sure your relatives know that they should vote and they have a right to vote. Another item they've done is they tried to eliminate straight ticket voting. So if you went in the voting booth and you wanted to vote for President Obama and everyone in his party because you believe they would have the same principles he has and the party has principles that they vote under, this would say you can't do that. You have to go down and check each individual individually, creating more time. So if you miss someone by accident, if you get confused and check the wrong party, etc., they can benefit, the opposing party can benefit from that. So they've made it more difficult for you to get to the polling place. They've cut out the amount of time you have to get there and to register. And now they've made it more difficult. Once you enter the polling place, you can be challenged. And then once you finally get to the ballot, they make it more difficult for you to vote your interest or your desire on the ballot. And so at every turn, they are trying to suppress the vote and make it more difficult for you to exercise your constitutional right to vote, both federal and state. And I can't emphasize that enough because these same people came in on the idea of the platform that they would support the Constitution and they're going to defend the Constitution while they're trying to destroy it. And they're taking America back to the 1800s. That's right.
And that's one of the things I noticed, and it wasn't here locally, but it seems to be a trend that's happening everywhere. But Montana, I believe it is, there's a person that is, I forget his name, but he's going to be running, and he said he wants to win off of the Obama backlash, and he used to be the organizer for the Ku Klux Klan. But now he's no longer affiliated, he just gets their mailing.
Well, again, these racially subversive groups and racially divisive groups are in full flower now that the Republican Party has taken control of many legislatures across the country. And what we have to understand again is this is a backwards looking strategy. Our country is changing. These are folks who are trying to cling to the past. As you said, they want to take us back. But our country is changing. And a lot of people get confused from the start. They think that somehow this was Europe. This was not Europe. This was a land that was populated by what we call Indian tribes, but tribes of people who lived across this country who were more similar to Hispanic people. And in fact, if you looked at their body structures, their hair texture, etc., you would call them Hispanic Indians or Indians Hispanic or whatever, but they were the indigenous population of this country. The interlopers, or the people who came into this country, were from Europe and other countries and brought African slaves with them, but this is not their country. And so when you start talking about immigration policy, you start asking folks from Europe and Ireland and so forth, whose families have been here 2 and 3 generations, where's the green card for the first generation of people who came here that was signed by the Indian tribes? They don't have one. So whenever we talk about that, we have to be clear about what history says really happened here.
Now, what I wanted to ask you about, if you don't mind, now I did participate in the visual that we had with the NAACP when we came down, and from my personal experience, what you just said, it kind of takes me back to Monroe, and I saw his reaction. Now, being an Afro-Indian myself, and I'm sure you have some background as well, and a lot of us may not even know. But to see his reaction, there was one of the members of the NAACP that was not of black descent, and so they had an exchange. And so when Leroux, later on when we came in, he tried to pick on someone else because of his skin color, because he is a black man, to kind of perpetuate that white versus black, thing, and tried to get the person arrested. And I mean, I stood up, and a couple other people that were with organizations stood up, and then he kind of backed off. But it took 2 people to talk him down. And
well, I think he's really indicative again of the racial hatred that has been fomented by folks over the last few years. And again, it's a backward-looking strategy. The time at which white Americans actually had the opportunity to be the dominant culture in America has changed. That time has passed. And just as the time when what we refer to as Indians, but indigenous people of America, had dominion over this land, that time passed. And now this time for people who are descendants of white Europeans to be in charge of America because of majority population, that time has passed. And so folks are trying to hold on to the past and using whatever means they can, again, racial hatred, stereotyping, fear-mongering, all these old tools that we use to fight integration are back in vogue. It's the same organizations are back in vogue, citizens councils, and Ku Klux Klans, and white knights, and other folks who are doing damage, but this time not necessarily physical damage all the time, but over the media, over the internet, raising money to suppress candidates who believe in civil rights, supporting candidates who believe in doing away with civil and constitutional rights. So they're still out there trying to use the old tactics in a new way, and we have to be aware. This country is changing. You've heard that saying, it's not nice to fool with Mother Nature. Well, Mother Nature has decided that the dominant population in 10 or 20 years from now will not be white in America. That is what it's going to be, and all of these steps to try to go backwards and cling to the past are not going to work, but they're still making them, and we have to be aware of them and fight them.
So what is the solution? What do people need to do right now? Getting people together, but what can we do to combat this?
Well, we have a voter ID bill as well that people have out there to try to make you produce all kind of government identification that will be used. You'll have to show before you can vote, and we need to fight that as well as all of these other bills that I talked about. And voter ID is one as well. Hopefully the governor will veto all of this foolishness, because it is foolishness. It's against our Constitution.